Thank you very much, Jessie, for having me, and thank you, everyone. I wish you well. You're doing all right due to this, crisis, and really just take care of yourselves and make sure you keep safe over there with your families. Now, I want to present an overview on the Central America energy sector in general terms to see how it has behaved during these years. And it is divided into two subsectors, the oil and gas subsector and the electricity subsector. And maybe the electricity markets have been more developed due to the facts that we are going to be explaining further. I would like to begin, let me see here. There you go. I would like to begin by quoting Mr. Warren Buffett, because I think it's a very interesting observation right here. Just let me see here. How can I check? Let me move. Okay. Mr. Buffett makes this observation. He says, Mr. Market can swing like a pendulum between extreme optimism and extreme pessimism. It is your job to transact with him only when prices and valuations are in your favor. Invest for the long term or long run. And so this last sentence, invest for the long run, is why I think it's very, very important, always. Just to keep your stock not thinking in the short term or the mid term, but always to think in the long term. Now, Central America, obviously, we are located right on the green circle over there, and I'm speaking and welcoming you from Guatemala. And I just shared two images. That's from the Tikal, the temple over there. That's called the Great Tower. And that's on the northern part of Guatemala. And on the bottom part, I just thought it was very nice to share another view of Tikal. That's actually one of the shots taken on one Star Wars movies, pretty famous. So if you sometime come to Guatemala, it's gonna obviously be over there. To start with some Central American macro indicators, so you have an idea what we are talking about. We are technically 6 countries in Central America, and I say technically because if you pay some attention to the Central American map, you have Belize. But it's been years that Guatemala, it's been trying to, it's our territory somehow. So that's the reason I'm explaining Central America. It's Guatemala all the way to Panama. And the area, Nicaragua, as you can see there, it's 119,000 square kilometers, which is the largest geographic country or extension, rather, with El Salvador being the smallest country, even though El Salvador is the most dense populated country. In GDP terms, billion US dollars, Guatemala is the strongest economy in Central America with 145.6 US billion, and followed by Panama. And population terms, I already mentioned the most dense is El Salvador, and we here have 17 million, almost. The last census was a couple of years ago. For a total population, that's 48.8 million inhabitants, not including Belize, which would take us maybe 2 or 3 more million people. In inflation terms, you can see that we here in Guatemala, it's like 4% annually. And an important observation is like, if you take a look at the exchange rates, El Salvador and Panama, their currency is the US dollar. And so the inflation rate is like 1% and pretty close following. It's 0.8% for Panama. And that's the reason. The exchange rates, I don't think that would be mean much to you, except just to know a little bit our currencies. The currency here in Guatemala, it's called the quetzal. which actually is a symbol from our national bird, which is called the quetzal. Salvador, we already explained, is the US dollar. In Honduras is the lempira. In Nicaragua, the Cordoba. In Costa Rica, the colones. And of course, Panama is the US dollar. Now, a very important figure here is if we take a look at the Economic Freedom Index of 2020. And this is very interesting because, of course, it ranks all the countries in the world, obviously, in how free they are to make business and so on. Actually, what they rate, mainly there are 4 issues. They rate the rule of law, the government size, the regulatory efficiency, and how open your market is. And in this sense, Panama, it has the highest rating in Central America, and then it's followed by Costa Rica, and in the 3rd place, it's Guatemala, and then you have El Salvador, Honduras, and Nicaragua as well. And last, I would like to explain a little bit about the funding that we, of course, received from the United States for this called U.S. Strategy for Engagement in Central America, of which, you know, we have the highest collaboration or funding, almost $70 million, and so on, El Salvador and Honduras. And there's this called the CARSI, which is the Regional Security Initiative. And overall, we in Central America receive funding for $250 million in that line. So that's the macroeconomic indicators, which obviously are very, very interesting facts for you to understand the context here in Central America. I would like to begin then on the oil and gas subsector, explaining for those of you who are not, so technical, to put it some way, put it in very simple terms, that the oil and gas industry works in phases. Basically, we have 3 phases. It's called the upstream, you have the midstream and downstream. And E&P stands for exploration and production of oil and gas. That's the phase 1. Then on phase 2, it's called the midstream, as I said. And you also have processing and transportation for natural gas and oil. And on the last phase, we have the downstream, which is the refining and the marketing, which, of course, in the case of oil, the most important product is the gasoline for transportation uses. And some people would say that actually to put or to include the refining phase on the midstream, but I think it's a matter of tastes, but I think this chart explains very well the oil and gas industry. In Guatemala, we basically, being a small country, the interest from the international companies have been mainly for independents, which mostly the independent companies made all their profit from the E&P phase, meaning the exploration and production. In regard the oil and gas business, you have, which I could call the oil and gas business drivers, which are 4 elements. Basically, in first place, we have the demand and supply interaction together with the energy commodities market, which is, as you know, the NYMEX, New York Mercantile Exchange, where all the trading takes place. Now, here, of course, the demand and supply interaction is the utmost importance, because, of course, it's like the way the price you find the price for any commodity or service. But now, why it's the commodity markets? It's a very important fact here, because it's the intersection where the physicals and financials come to place. In what sense? So that you can have an idea. Of course, when you have you contract delivery of natural gas or oil, you have to physically deliver it. But then what is happening in the at the same time in the commodities market is that they are providing this very, very efficient market for risk taking and reliable price information, and so that you have an idea what's going on in the financial markets is from 8 to 10 times the volume of the physicals market in volume. So that's very important. But now, once again, the role of the energy commodities markets is, and I will insist in that, is to make a market so efficient so they will take all the risk or manage all the industry risk, and of course to provide the reliable price information. In second place, you have the players or the industry structure, which are conformed from IOCs, NOCs, hybrids, and independents. In this sense, you have the IOCs, which are international oil companies. We all know very private companies, mostly Exxon, Chevron, Shell, and BP or British Petroleum, which are vertically integrated companies, you know, have all the phases that we talked before. And the most important role, I would think, is the NOC's role, given that the private companies, we have to come to all the countries to make these contracts, to make the exploration and go through all the in those industry phases. NOCs stands for National Oil Companies, including OPEC countries. And I put some examples over there. You have Pemex from Mexico, Petróleos de México, PDVSA, Petróleos de Venezuela, and Saudi Aramco, of course, from Saudi Arabia. On the other hand, you have the hybrids, which in industrial terms, it's a mix of private and public companies, whereas you make contracting with the country to establish this relationship for exploration, production, and for sharing the findings of any oil and gas that you may have. And I put here the case of Petrobras in Brazil, where as you all know, you have a very important offshore oil findings. And last, you have the independent companies that mainly profit from phase one, which is production. And in Guatemala's case, we have companies from Colombia and one from France exploiting or producing oil. In third place, we have obviously the energy security is not taking much time in that sense. As an oil gas driver, you have to make sure energy is available 24/7 everywhere in the world. And so that's a very important driver. And last is the alternatives to oil. You know, there's some talk about the peak oil issue 50, 60 years ago. Nobody knows if that's true, but in that case, we have to be prepared for answer the question, what if we run out of oil? And of course, it's when it comes to play the renewable energy issues. Another question is about the end of all the oil era. You know, you're familiar with that. As I was saying, have we reached the peak oil point? We're gonna be running out of oil, out of gas, and it's been talked, mainly last couple of years, about this new Green Deal, which of course it's focused on renewables and electric cars, which it's of course a world tendency now. But now, my opinion, it's in yellow over there. If you analyze the fossil fuels issue, in the first place, it represents close to, and this is a very important figure, it's close to 80% of primary energy consumption. For what? The oil uses you have, of course, is on the demand side. The main use, as explained, is for transportation, industrial use, and of course for electric power generation. And the natural gas uses you have mainly for residential uses, commercial, industrial, and of course, once again, for electricity production. So that's one reason that, it would take, according to some studies, at least 50 more years, if not 100 more years, for depleting all those resources. And the last reason is like, those millions of adjustments that you have to do in production and consumption just to replace that resource. So to me, the end of the oil era is a little far away. Now, to share some statistics from the demand and supply point that we already covered. If you can see on the upper left side hand, it's the world consumption, where oil is in the first place, followed by coal and natural gas consumption. Those are last year's 2019 statistics over there. Oil with 193 exajoules and 115, 141. And just a commentary here, this comes from the BP stats review last year's, and it took my attention, or caught my attention, that they started using exajoules as this energy parameter, because as you know, you have to measure in barrels of oil equivalent. So that's new in this sense, but making the conversion, for example, the oil, it's around 95 million barrels per day, or 34.7 billion barrels a year. So you have just to make the conversion there. Now, the producers, the major producers from the first 7, you have the regional world regions, you have the Middle East, first place with around 30 million barrels per day. Then you have North America with 24 million barrels, and so on. CIS countries, it's those Commonwealth independent states, pretty close to Russia, or independent from Russia actually, with 14 million daily. Then you have Africa, the Asia Pacific region, and we down here, South and Central America, are on 6th place with 6 million barrels of oil per day. And in regard the natural gas, you have the North America, which is Canada, United States, and Mexico, producing 1,000 billion cubic meters of natural gas, followed by 6 countries, and then third place, the Middle East. And we are in the last position with 173 cubic billion meters. Now, the primary energy trends in energy for 2019 is, as you can see there, China was the biggest driver in the change for the primary energy consumption. Almost 3/4 of the increment from 2018 to 2019 was driven by China. Now, by fuel, renewables and natural gas were the major drivers. That's a very interesting statistic. And there's also a shift away from coal towards natural gas. However, even if that's the tendency in the world, less coal, coal provided 36% of the global energy, and whereas renewables represented only 10%. On the prices front, we can see pretty clearly this historic chart from 1861, all the way to 2019, and of course with all the price swings over there. And but the main thing to observe here is around $60, $50 price for WTI, and also for the Brent oil. But now, due to COVID crisis, it's almost 8.1 million barrels less demand per day. And price, I checked the price yesterday, was about around $40 per barrel for the WTI. And the natural gas was around $183 million per million BTUs. Used to be around $3 to $2.50. So that's mainly the short-term impact for this situation we're having right now. Now, Guatemala. Okay, the oil, what's happening with oil in Central America? As I explained, and you can see here, Guatemala is the only country, oil producing and gas producing country in Central America. And why? And the reason is that you can see on the map here, we are pretty close to many very important oil fields from the southern part in Mexico and the Gulf of Mexico. And we share, as you can read there, the same geology. And obviously, you need these sedimentary basins, and you have basic Jurassic black shales sharing on the southern Mexican border with Guatemala. And what you can see also there is that our main production comes from the northern basin in Guatemala, which basically in Guatemala we have three basins, you know, the northern, the Caribbean basin, and on the Pacific basin also. And what we are producing oil, as I was saying, is mainly from the northern basin. We have some studies made some years ago by the U.S. Research centers in oil and gas, and it was very, very interesting seeing that there is a very high potential for finding natural gas on not deep water, actually shallow water in the Pacific basin over there, but it takes lots of capex, you know, expenditures. So that's one of the reasons the government here in Guatemala hasn't, gone that step for the southern basin. Now, on the development, quickly, I want to say that in 30s and 40s, all the way to 50s, and during the 50s, our male peak production here around 25,000 barrels per day in 2003. But it's been coming down. That's mainly due to a lack of investment in Guatemala, as I was saying. Whereas in 2018, we can very clearly see a drop in production, reaching 9.1 million barrels, which is a 63% drop. So the government has to do something pretty soon about it, and that's one of the opportunities we'll talk pretty soon. Now, natural gas, I was explaining, we have this, on the other hand, you know, very, very good news. And 2017 today, we've been producing 8 million cubic feet daily and condensate of around 850 barrels per day. So that's pretty good news. Now, another piece of information that would be very interesting to share is the API degree, which means basically in oil terms, the higher the number, the API number, is the better the oil. And we call it sweet oil. We have actually two kinds of oil, sweet and sour, depending on the sulfur content and the API degrees. In Guatemala, we have all kinds of oil. Actually, Perenco is having like a 15, 18 API degree, which is pretty heavy oil. And it's got like a 3 to 6% sulfur content, which is a sour oil. It's pretty much contaminated. And of course, we don't have the capacity to refine it here. And that's why we have to send all that oil for special refining in the United States, mainly Louisiana refineries. But we also, at the same time, have, even if it's a small production, we have 33 or 35 API degree oil, which is pretty good because it makes more cheap the production processes for taking the LNGs and gasolines. Now, the opportunities side, I would say the new administration policy, and it says the Ministerio de Energía y Minas, it's that actually the information coming firsthand from the minister. They have a plan to begin with new tender of oil and gas rounds in exploration and production to attract FDIs, foreign direct investments, and 2, to keep promoting NG's commercial uses. Now, this is very, very important because, you know, in Guatemala, as you can see over there, we have prolific geology. There's also a good business environment, and also adequate regulation framework or regulatory framework. And mainly in Guatemala, we offer very favorable contracting fiscal terms. For example, it's only 5% taxes for natural gas condensate. whereas in other countries we go maybe 20-25% tax rate, which is pretty good in Guatemala in that sense. And we have in the profit share contracting terms, which is pretty common around the world. You have what it's called cost oil and then profit oil. And on the cost, after cost oil, which is where companies, after they fund the oil, they will take all the capex or recoup all the capex and the opex. The government will have a 70% take and the company a 30% take. So that's, if you will make some research on around the world, that's pretty good profit share terms. The government thinks that in 4 years, we're expected to increase production then to 12,000 barrels per day. In 8 years, we'd go from 16 to 20,000 barrels per day. And in 12 years to reach, you know, the levels we had back in the 2000, early 2000s, about 25 to 30,000 barrels per day goal. And before I just start with the electricity markets, an observation that the opportunity would come with the hand of these tender oil and gas rounds, because it would be easier for companies that wanted to come here to obtain the permissions and licenses pretty quick, I would say. I mean, so they want to make it go forward as fast as possible, because obviously that would be good for our country and that's good for the companies. And so that's what I want to express or to explain about the oil industry. Now, about in the energy markets, as I was saying, it's the most important market in whole Central America. And I wanted to start by looking at this chart. You know, it's the regional electricity generation by fuel 2019 all over the world. But the thing is that in South and Central America, we are water countries. You know, we are water-rich countries. And that's an obvious reason that we have to generate of electricity using water and renewables. We have sun year-round, we have good irradiation, and we have a good wind position, in geographic. We have, geographically speaking, we have a nice wind parameters here. But it's impressive. You see the percentage. I don't have the percentage here, but South and Central America by far uses water for electricity production, followed by electricity. Actually, it's the other way. If you see this country, which is Middle East, they go all the way using natural gas for their electricity production. The electricity matrix in Central America installed capacity by resource. We can see again that hydropower is the winner. We have around 7,000 megawatts installed capacity in water, 1,800 megawatts biomass, and 978 solar, which is, we are sort of new in solar, but I would say no more than 10 years to start going with the solar technology. Oil and coal go hand in hand. We have 5,600 megawatts installed capacity in mostly heavy fuel oil for generation, and 648 in coal for coal production. Wind, we have 1,196 megawatts installed capacity in Central America. And last, we have a geothermal capacity of 650 megawatts. And we can relate it with, let me put it up here. If you see to the pie chart, the energy production by resource, again, it's almost 50% water. If you add coal and oil, we have 25% of the energy production by thermal. And solar and wind, again, has been increasing for the last 10 years and pretty strongly the last 5 years, mainly in Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras. Costa Rica, a little, and geothermal. Okay, 7%, and biomass, 6%. So one thing we can infer from here, as you can see, in Central America, we are pretty well diversified. Our matrix, we don't depend on one resource alone, which is different from the, if you can analyze different countries that we'll see right now. Here, you can, I wanted to share the electricity market's characteristics, you know, just quick facts. First of all, you see this triangle over there because we are known here, you know, Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras as the Northern Triangle countries. For that reason, you know, we have many things in common. And so actually, but the thing is, we are called the Northern Triangle companies. And then you have Nicaragua, Costa Rica, and Panama way south. Let me start by, you know, explaining a little bit about the Northern Triangle countries. Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, we are free market, open market countries. That's the first thing important for you to know. Electricity legislation, almost 20 years ago, here in Guatemala and El Salvador, we have a pretty strong, started with a pretty strong regulatory legal framework for the electricity sector in Guatemala and El Salvador. But as you see there, in 2014, Honduras started to open up in that sense. So what Honduras is trying to do is just to imitate, to put it some way, Guatemala's electricity market. And actually, we are glad that we are advising Honduras government for the step going forward in this sense. Guatemala, it's as I was explaining, has a very high diversified matrix. If you look at the individual countries, we have the most and the best diversified matrix. Honduras, for example, it's more dependent on fossil fuels. On the other hand, and this is very important to El Salvador, they produce almost 30%, 25 to 30% of their electricity due to geothermal energy. And should be like envious in that sense, because we have lots of volcanoes here, but we produce our electricity, geothermal, it's only 1 to 2%, 3% at the most. And so we are working pretty strong, very hard. Actually, this past four years, we've been, as I explained before, working with this company that wants to, they're exploring right now, and they are drilling for geothermal electricity or resource here in Guatemala. And so I would think that we have water, and can you imagine just to having a good geothermal energy source? That would be enough for us. You know, geothermal is, we are blessed with geothermal energy, it's 24/7, etc. But the thing is that coming back to the El Salvador, they give geothermal energy very high importance. On the tariff prices here is, of course, the residential prices. We are pretty close. Dollars per kilowatt hour. Guatemala is 25 cents, pretty close to El Salvador at 23 cents per kilowatt hour, whereas in Honduras it's around 21 cents. And of course, this is for the end user, residential user, and it does not include any subsidies that we have. We have a rate in Guatemala, for example, we subsidize certain rate that would take maybe 4 cents of that tariff off. So we'd make it like a 20-cent tariff in residential terms. So for residential, it's pretty close also for the tariff for commercial users. Installed capacity, now here it's almost double installed capacity that Honduras and Salvador. We're around 4,100 megawatts. El Salvador and Honduras, they are around 2.6 thousand megawatts. And maximum demand for Guatemala, it's half, 1,800 megawatts. El Salvador, 1,000. And maximum demand is 1,600 megawatts for Honduras. And now maybe here you can wonder why we have maximum demand of 1,800. Why do we need so much installed capacity? Let me. So just connect here my computer.
Rolando, I'm sorry to interrupt, but you have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Well, so Guatemala, El Salvador, and Honduras, I was saying, to me, they're the strongest companies, electricity companies. Then I will skip Nicaragua and Panama and just say that Costa Rica is very vertically integrated. That's very, very different from all countries in Central America. They mostly renewables matrix. That's a very, very important difference. 95% generated by renewables. And they also give geothermal energy high importance. Almost they generate 15% with geothermal energy. Now, these 5 minutes, I want just to concentrate on the REM. You have, as I said, independent countries, and they all producing their own electricity, but starting in 76, mainly in 1996, there started a gradual process of integrating all the electricity markets with these following objectives: to promote the development of the electricity or electrical industry, to satisfy the electricity needs of the region, and it's considered a semi-electric market. That's the main thing. The legal framework is the international treaty, 2 protocols, and the normative, or what we call the reglamentos also. In the REM's institutional structure, it's very important. We have 4 institutions: the transmission owner, a regulator, a regional director council in charge of policy coordination and the energies conferred by the energies ministers, and you have the dispatcher. That's pretty, I would say, standard way of structuring an electricity market. And of course, you have the REM agents, which is trading, transmission, generation, distribution, and large end users. And this chart here, it's the physical electricity transmission, which is conform. It's almost 1,800 kilometers, 15 substations. It costs, the capex was for $534 million, which is financed through electricity tariffs charged to each country. And it's parallel to the transmission line. We have a fiber optic communication network, and the design capacity is 300 megawatts. And also a very important fact is that we have a link in Mexico. There's a 400 megawatt, 300 megawatt, and 400 kV line. And also on the southern part, there's an interconnection with Colombia. And so that conforms what we call the CIEPAC, which is basically the physical transmission system that we use for these electricity interchanges. The REM markets, basically we have 2 markets, which is pretty common all around the world. We have the spot market, and you have which is called an opportunity market, and wholesale market. Whereas, of course, the contracts market, means around 60, almost 70% of all electricity contracting between countries. And the more means about 34, opportunity market, 34%. Exchanges on the regional market, we can see it's going all the way up through the years. 2019, we exported about transactions meant 3,000 gigawatt per hour with an average price of $90 per megawatt hour. So that's prices come down, transactions going up. So that presents a pretty good opportunity. And now the step forward here, it's you can read later the issues, but basically is that currently a 3rd protocol amendment has been formulated based on identified improvements and necessary reinforcements to direct the emerging development towards the treaty's objectives. That's the first one step forward. A second is the regulatory reforms necessary to allow the long-term development of contracts in the regional market. So basically, looking forward, again, those are the issues that we are being confronted with. And last, the opportunities. You see, basically opportunities as in oil and gas, you have opportunities on the generation, geothermal and solar and wind, the renewables mainly. Geothermal energy, you have exploration and production opportunities on downstream, and you have we are working now very strongly with this financing GDF, Geothermal Development Facility, funds coming from Germany, from KfW Bank, and so they are financing the exploration and production for Central and South America. And also you have opportunities for generation from solar and wind through bidding processes in El Salvador, Honduras, and Costa Rica. On the transmission front, we have in Guatemala, there's a very, very important project for sale, They won a bidding process of almost 700 kilometers, and they are in need of capital, and they are waiting for companies coming here. And last, distribution, you have in El Salvador important, interesting distribution companies that are for sale now. And so the last part I went very, very, very fast, but thank you all. Thank you, Dr. Cirelli, for for the opportunity. Of course, now we go to the questions part, and thank you.
Thank you very much for that interesting presentation and for letting us know how everything works in the electricity market in Central America, not just Guatemala. We have one question from Jean Dixon, our executive, I was going to say executive producer, executive director. He says, is there a sustainable process for recycling spent batteries?
So that part I didn't understand.
Is there a sustainable process for recycling spent batteries?
Spent batteries? No, not really. No, not. The answer is no. We are don't have that process. We are not in that. No.
Mm-hmm. No. Another question is that is there a certain goal in terms of percentage determined by the government for the share of renewable energy other than hydro, and new regulations for energy companies to meet that goal?
Yeah. Here in Guatemala, we have, there's a specific law that it's to institute some incentives on renewables. So in that sense, we want to push renewables, yes, to go forward, even though we don't have a set percentage, saying in 5 years we want to go, but I would say, just speculating a little, we want renewables. We have solar in Guatemala. Installed capacity is 100 megawatts right now. Maybe we want to push it a little, 50 to 70 more megawatts here. That's in Guatemala alone, and also go with more wind. And but then I can say that in Honduras and El Salvador, those guys are pretty strong in wanting to move their matrices all the way with renewables. They are investing pretty heavily in that, so much more than in Guatemala. Mm-hmm. So even if I cannot give you a number, yes, we want to go forward with the renewables.
Mm-hmm. Are you advising your clients towards that, towards adding more renewable energy? Are your clients, your client base, are they interested in adding more renewable energy to their portfolios?
Yes, there's one thing, the clients, they want profit, they want nice margins. And so they would come to these countries and they would say, okay, do you have any incentives for renewables, incentives for non-renewables? But yes, now given this, the law regulation I'm talking about, most of them are very interested in these incentives that the government is giving, and they want to invest mostly, I would say, in solar power. It takes, you as an electrical engineer know pretty well, you have the problem with the grids. The electric grids in Guatemala, and they're not homogeneous, and so you have problems to injecting electricity with this intermittent production. So that's one thing we have to take care. Basically in Honduras, they are a very weak grid, and so they have to make the investments in that sense also.
Okay.
Yes.
We have another question from a future speaker, Azam Chowdhury. He says, how can we predict ROI? I think we're having bandwidth problems as well.
Yeah, just a little. I can.
Question is, how can we predict ROI? If you look at the chat, Zoom chat, you can see the question there as well.
Yeah, I say ROI, return on investment. I would say there have been some studies, and I can just say right away that renewables, the return on investments for equity investments, they are asking for 15-16%. You know, and you have, you know, the WACs here, it's around maybe 8%. You have pretty good financing from international banks, developed banks, pretty cheap nowadays, of course. And but now, if you want to invest, they will ask for 15%, if not 20%. And they are achievable here. Mainly, I would say that's a very good question. And you have interest investors coming in Guatemala, oil and gas. You have good access to license permissions, and you would say you have possibility for larger ROIs than those, maybe 20-25%, I would say, and pretty safe.
Okay. All right. Sorry, you're breaking up.
So that's
there's a problem with the bandwidth over there, so you're breaking up a little bit.
That's it.
Okay. Can you write down your email address to chat so that everyone
but that's fine. That's
if people have other questions, maybe they can directly contact you.
Sure.
You can provide your email address, or if you have any other questions, you can contact me, and I can put you in contact with Rolando if you like. Any other questions? I think we have a little bit of time for one more question. Just let us know. So if you have any questions, just write it down. Right. So if not, and since we're having a little bit of an issue with the bandwidth over there, let's thank Rolando for his great presentation and for being brave enough to be the first volunteer for this. Let's see. We have more comments coming into chat. All right. One says that from Ryan, any thoughts regarding green financing? And that's going to be the last question today.
Yes, green financing. It's been coming here in Guatemala 3 years, from 3 years to date. And basically, we have development banks interested in green financing. The CABE, Central American Bank for Economic Integration, they are interested in green financing. And again, German funds coming from Germany, very, very interested in green financing. And since they want to push, as I was explaining, geothermal energy and renewables in general, you have pretty good access to that kind of financing, yes.
Great, thank you. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna send everyone Rolando's email, and so that you can contact him directly if you have any other questions. And you already know my email. If not, we're going to provide that to you as well.
Okay.
So
thank you
everyone for being a part of this webinar, and we hope to see you next week at 9 a.m. U.S. Eastern Time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.